So, hi everyone, welcome to the final third day of the Small Business and Nonprofit Conference. My name is Lisa Thorpe. I'm the Social Sciences and Grants and Foundations librarian here at St. Louis Public Library. I'm at the Central Library location, the big beautiful building downtown. And I am delighted to introduce our presenter for today's program on community-centric fundraising. Amy Bossy has over 15 years of experience in the nonprofit sector. She's worked with local, regional, and national organizations and has built entire development programs from the ground up, including one for an organization with a 140-year history but no previous fundraising efforts. Her passion lies in helping organizations solve problems and discover the most efficient and effective ways to fulfill their missions. She brings a wealth of knowledge from her diverse roles, from program manager to development director. Amy is currently writing a book, which we'll need to talk, Amy, about getting that in the library, about making fundraising more approachable, and she serves on several nonprofit boards. Amy holds a BA in Communication and Sociology, as well as a Master's in Public Policy Administration, and just recertified as a certified fundraising executive for the third time. In her spare time, she loves to travel and spend time with her 5 rescued cats, who may be making a cameo visit to this presentation. Today's sessions are obviously virtual, and we're wrapping up with an amazing prize, $500 Amazon gift card sponsored by a vendor, EBSCO. No need to grab tickets today. Your presence in each session automatically enters you into the drawing. The more sessions you attend, the more times your name is in that virtual hat. And the winner will be announced on Monday. Keep an eye on your inbox. Good luck and enjoy the session. Amy, take it away.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here today and so grateful for you all for showing up. Please ask questions as we go along. I want this to be an engaging conversation, but I recognize that some of you might be just taking in the information and saving your questions for the end. However you want to engage and participate is fine. So thanks for that great introduction. I am an accidental fundraiser. I did not, when you take those back to school photos and they say, when I grow up, I want to be I did not hold the sandwich board saying I want to be a fundraiser. Had no idea what it even was when I was a kid. In fact, when I graduated from college, I said, I love this work, this nonprofit work, but the last thing I want to do is fundraising because I'm not a salesperson. But when I graduated grad school, my boss at the time said, well, you're already doing it. And I said, And she said, and you're good at it. So being the analytical person I am, I did some research and found that there's a local organization called the Association of Fundraising Professionals here in St. Louis. It's a worldwide organization, and they were accepting fellows, and I could learn kind of the hands-on applicable work of fundraising. So I applied and became a fellow, and I learned that, I was doing the fundraising work, and I just needed some more hands-on training and support around it. And that it's really not scary like I thought I was. It's not being a salesperson and it was years later that I learned that this idea of community-centric fundraising is the way that I wanted to approach it. It didn't have to be sleazy or make me feel gross. And I learned that years later. So that's why I have embraced this idea. And we'll talk about what community-centric fundraising is and isn't, and kind of how to use that in our approach. So today, like I said, we'll talk about philanthropy, how we got to where we are today, what CCF is, what the data says. I'm a big data wonk. I like the proof, tell me how we know what we know, and then how you can use these ideas to actually apply them to the work that you do around fundraising. So if you can, in the chat, What time do we have to end today?
So we have an hour and 15 minutes.
That's what I thought. Okay.
12:45.
If you want to just drop your name in and your organization, if you want to get to know each other, we can say what we do outside of our paid work and what you love about this season. This is my favorite season. And why I think we already asked why you decided to join us today, what you hope to learn from this session. I'd love to see that in the chat.
Hi. Is it okay if we don't put it in chat?
Sure. Welcome.
Cool.
Yes.
I appreciate it. Sometimes my fingers have trouble with the typing, but my name is Ashley. I also use the name Wren, like the bird. And I'm trying to start a nonprofit community educational kitchen where all of the ingredients are there and it's staffed and people can come and choose whatever they would like to make and then make their own food and clean their own space. So that's kind of the organization that I'm trying to get off the ground. I am a food nerd, so I love to cook when I'm not working. And I also may have a cameo from my cat, whose name is Muffin Man, for my affinity for baked goods.
Love it.
So glad to be here today. Amy, thank you so much for presenting. Lisa, thank you for the great introduction. And I'm looking forward to learning more about this perspective.
Great. Anyone else care to share? Love that you are bike commuter. My husband does that on his way to work when the weather's nice. I work from home, so I don't have to commute.
Like around.
Nice. Great. Well, you can always drop it in the chat or come off mute if you want and share. So let's get into I love everything about fall. Yes. Fellow fall person. How did we get here? So this whole idea of philanthropy and nonprofits was designed to be this way. We are not succeeding. And when I say that, I mean, wouldn't it be, hi, Claire. Excellent. Wouldn't it be great if we woke up tomorrow and didn't have to have a job? And I say that for all the folks that are not volunteers, that are professionals in the fundraising sector like myself. My very first boss, actually I did my intern with them. She said, my goal is to work myself out of a job. We are trying to, big picture, solve big problems, right? And the reality is that we could end homelessness. We could end generational poverty. We could solve all of these issues. We have the resources. We have the thought leadership. If we just applied it all together in a systematic way, we could fix it, right? But we just choose not to. Instead, we're sending people into submersibles in the bottom of the sea. You know, the wealth gap continues to grow. The rich are getting richer, and the data shows it. So it is a systematic thing, and whatever you feel, whether you agree with it's the government's job or it's the public's job or philanthropy has come in to fill that gap, but it is not working. We still have nonprofits that are jumping up to fill in the gaps. So you are not, if you're not successful in your fundraising, it's because the system was set up that way. Yes. So you answered one of the questions, who is the guy who are the folks in these pictures, but we'll get to them in a second. Does anyone know the meaning of the word philanthropy? It means the love of humankind, which is a beautiful sentiment to think about, right? And we have, to this day, in this day and age, it has grown to mean large-scale giving. It's often synonymous with charity, and it has all sorts of other implications. But how did we get here? So before this continent was settled, there were already people here, indigenous people, and they practiced their own form of community care, collective care, mutual aid, and their societies were rooted in this whole idea of reciprocity. And they had potluck ceremonies. The one that is most well known is the Thanksgiving dinner that we still celebrate to this day. And goods were distributed to all community members, and generosity was shown to everyone, and their very culture was rooted in those core values. They emphasized collective prosperity over individual wealth, and really upheld that tradition of sharing resources to maintain community well-being. And then colonization happened, and in the aftermath of the Civil War and World War I, the US faced a growing wealth gap. Social movements and charitable organizations popped up to sort of address those needs as the society began to rapidly industrialize. And philanthropy really popped up, especially religious philanthropy, to try to fill those needs. And if anyone, I think it was Lisa who said, this guy right here, Andrew Carnegie, popped up to say, we see these issues and we need to fix them. So he wrote something called the Gospel of Wealth. So he said, it is our duty as wealthy individuals to distribute our wealth in ways that benefit society. What he did not address is that wealth was accumulated in extractive ways. The reason we have 5-day work week and Labor Day and things of that nature are because of this man. So he totally ignored that, but did found public libraries, hooray, universities and other foundations, and said it's the moral duty of wealthy individuals to do that work. He also, by the way, did not include women in the conversation and essentially said that they should be silent and just volunteer. They had no voice. We have to remember who were considered people at this time. Lisa, yes.
Outside of my room here at Central Library, which is a Carnegie Library, one of several we've got in the area. So again, thank you. I do point out we've got pictures of the construction. So while Mr. Carnegie, the foundation, wrote us a nice $1 million check, we bought a heck of a lot of steel with the money that Carnegie gave us. And of course, he got his wealth through US Steel. So I think a bunch of it may have ended up back with him.
Yeah. So it's sort of reciprocal. And back to my first point, who were considered people at that time? Who were the people that you had to help? Women weren't allowed to vote, and people of color were not even considered full humans. They had no rights. So just an interesting thing to consider, to think about as we think about the history and the building blocks of philanthropy in the United States, but also, of course, across the globe. So this, and also the whole idea of saviorism, the top-down paternalistic idea that the elite need to determine where the money goes and how the poor need to be helped, and the othering us versus them. So then in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, we really saw some growing tension between private charity and public responsibility. The wealthy individuals and private foundations were making significant contributions to social welfare, and the government started seeing recognizing its role to address systemic issues such as poverty, inequality, the New Deal. So 1917, the Revenue Act pops up during World War I, and this allowed for the charitable deductions. And this really was revolutionary, a financial incentive for private giving. And this policy further formalized philanthropy, linking private wealth with public good through tax policy. Hooray! And I say that jokingly. It was just another way to make it formalized and to have the government play a role. Then we come to post-World War II, and we saw the booming middle class rise after that, and corporations really increased their giving. The government's role in social welfare grew through programs like Social Security and Medicare, yet private philanthropy continued to fill the gaps left by those government programs, especially in things like the arts, education, public health. Basically, the Tax Reform Act in 1969 was the government was corporations realizing, hey, we want to give this money away, but we want benefits for it. So that's why the Tax Reform Act of 1969 happened. It regulated the foundations in private giving, imposing new rules and requiring more transparency and limiting tax benefits. And it aimed to prevent foundations from becoming merely tax shelters, which is what they all had in mind. Does anyone know how much foundations are required to give away every year? 5%. And that happened as a result of this Tax Reform Act. So you can kind of shelter all your money in a foundation. You can hoard your wealth. But finally, the government said, no, you have to give away 5%. But included in that 5% can be salaries, operating dollars of that foundation. So back to that, okay, so we bought the steel that we used to pay for this library that you donated to us, and you are the owner of that steel company. It's sort of reciprocal. Is that a word? Did I make it up?
Reciprocal?
Reciprocal, thank you. And then we can't forget that there were lots of social justice movements happening, the civil rights movement, and a really forward push for equity. And then along came trickle-down economics, which didn't really work. They thought it would, but it didn't. And then, does anyone know what VUCA means? It's a military term, which a lot of the terms that we use nowadays are actually from the military, and they've been co-opted to business, and then they trickle down into nonprofits. So volatile, uncertain, complexity, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And that has pretty much explained the past few years for everything, especially the economy and nonprofits. We had the Great Recession. Then we had the pandemic. What does our generation say? We can't live through another unprecedented event. And that's just sort of the way things are. And then the TCJA Act is, sorry, I moved things on my screen, is the Tax and Jobs Act of 2017. Does anyone know what that did?
I think it got rid of it increased the standard deduction, so it made it more unlikely that a lot of people would do itemized deductions. A lot of us normal people.
Normal people. Yeah, it absolutely did. And we are so seeing the ramifications of that now. It and we'll talk about this in a few slides, giving had constantly been increasing over time, and now it has taken a dip. And as much as we like to think that people's motivations for giving are not driven by tax deductions, the data has now proven that they are, because we're seeing a steep decline. So yeah, it's again, it's a tool for the wealthy, because it's only benefiting the wealthy now in terms of tax deductions, and we're seeing it as seeing it as being something that's problematic for folks who can't make those deductions anymore. So very interesting. And then also we're seeing a decline in volunteerism, and that has to do as a holdover from the pandemic and being in social isolation. But it's also something that has been trending that way over time as well. So let's get into that information. What does all of this data tell us? Where am I getting this information? Also, does this surprise anyone that volunteerism is down and that giving is down? So there's a report that, unfortunately, not surprising. Okay. Yeah. There's a report that comes out every year called Giving USA. And it really tells the picture of US charitable giving. So it has the data from the previous year. So it comes out in around June or July. And the 2023 report revealed that charitable giving reached $557.16 billion last year, which is amazing, right? That's a huge sum. That's a big chunk of change. And when you adjust it for inflation, you can see that charitable giving declined by 2.1%. So trust, we have also seen that trust in nonprofits has been steadily declining. And the good news, though, is from this report we see that trust in nonprofits increased by 5 points to 57%. It had been declining for 4 years, and it finally went up. So that's one good thing. Why do we think that trust has been declining in nonprofits?
I think there have been more cases in the news of fraud and unsavory things, and so that may not be a representative of like how prominent the problem is among nonprofits, but it's definitely a high percentage of what people are hearing about, and so that can definitely influence people's ability to trust or willingness to trust organizations. And I also think I had another point, but I forgot, so I'll come back.
Okay. I think trust in institutions overall, that's a fair assessment, Lisa. Yeah. Yeah. But that is a good piece of data that we found, is that it rebounded for the first time in 4 years. And yes, that is such a good point, Laura. So many nonprofits popped up during the pandemic, and now so many are sunsetting, which is another term for closing or shuttering. And I think this is a good time to point out, what is the purpose of a nonprofit? Is it designed to last in perpetuity? I mean, this is kind of just a thought for all of us. Do you want to wake up tomorrow and still have, if you're a food bank, still have people to feed? Or would you rather wake up tomorrow and hungry Americans not be an issue anymore, right?
Yeah, I think it's like you said with philanthropy, ideally it's something that will put itself out of business. I mean, I think in an ideal world, all nonprofits would identify a problem, set out to fix the problem, and then be like, all right, good job, moving on.
So I think that's true. The only thing I can think of where it wouldn't be is for culture organizations like theaters and dance companies, things like that, because you you want that to exist forever, right? But what you don't want is that you don't want to be struggling for resources. You know, you want to do the shows you want to do when you want to do them, how you want to do them, and not have to say, how are we going to get people in the doors, or how are we going to pay our actors, things like that. So it's an interesting thought to think about. Folks say operate your nonprofit like a business. Well, yes, and you don't really start a business in order for it to close. So just an interesting paradigm to think about. Also, now that, and we'll talk about these trends in a second as well, the pandemic saw needs for, needs shift for folks in terms of funding and in terms of what they needed, for operations of nonprofits. So we're also seeing it with like local restaurants. You either flourished or you didn't. And so collaboration has been a big thing. How can you collaborate? And that's a big piece of community centrism. So we'll speak about that as well. And how we shouldn't be in constant competition with one another, but think about how we can operate in the same ecosystem together, how a rising tide lifts all boats, and how we can work together to do that. And come from a theory of abundance type thing as well. The only nonprofit that has ever solved its problem that I know of is March of Dimes. Does anyone know what they did?
I think they set out to cure polio.
They did. Polio. Mm-hmm. They did. And they essentially cured it. It's essentially eradicated from the face of the earth. And so they switched to focus on just mother, infant, and maternal health. So they had a good thing going, and they said, we're going to do this instead. That's the only one I know of. If anyone else knows of any, please tell me. But now you see, when folks tell me they want to start a nonprofit, I think, great, but there are over 30,000 something nonprofits in the state of Missouri. So really think about why, what's your value proposition? Why are you starting one? Think about your competition and picture who can be your partners in this work. And is that the best, idea to start something new, or who can you partner with and be on that journey with together in collaboration versus competition? I just encourage that thought. So VUCA around the sector, what does that mean based off all this data? The race and equity and the DEI backlash is a real thing. There was recently a case that was brought all the way to the Supreme Court. Does anyone know about that? The Fearless Fund. It's a organization in Atlanta, and it was brought up that they can't, they give grants to Black women-owned businesses, and they said that they can't give funding to them because that is racist. So the case was brought all the way to the Supreme Court, and instead of letting it get decided upon, the Fearless Fund said, we will settle. And to me, that's a terrible thing, because if they essentially lost, but if they would have taken it to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court ruled, then it would have had catastrophic implications for all nonprofits. It was heard from the courts and presented to the courts on the basis of free speech but really it was DEI all the way. Oh, I am having problems seeing the messages. That was a good one. Can someone read that message for me? That just popped up.
Yes, the Fearless Fund was really helping women grow their businesses. Sad attack on this organization. And previously from the same participant, sadly, the nonprofit prohibits the organization from making money and stability, and people want to grow their career and income, and nonprofit doesn't fulfill that desire, going back to our earlier.
Yeah, so if we can't do the work that we intend to do, we set out to do, and be controlled and constricted by government regulations, that's going to be very problematic. So it was a sad day when that ruling came out, and the potential election coming up is going to have many potential ramifications if we keep going along that same path with DEI backlash. So we already talked about the tax policy. There are lots more tax implications in the works, and that's something that I think nonprofits don't pay enough attention to, whether it's the actual tax benefits for their own, that individuals can take, or the tax exempt status for organizations themselves, and what that means. You do have to pay attention to that, especially around things like donor advised funds. We talked about foundations and how they're required to give away 5% every year. But what about donor advised funds? Does anyone know anything about those? Can anyone tell me what a donor advised fund, sometimes called a DAF, is?
Please cut me off if other people want to chime in, but when I'm sitting down and doing grant research, showing people how to do grant research here at the library, we'll see St. Louis Community Foundation, for example, up in the top of the results, and I'll say, so they're they're a different kind of entity. They're a donor advised fund. And the way I always kind of colloquially describe it is, say I'm a rich person and I care about puppies and the theater, and I'm too busy to give away my money, so I'm going to give a big pot of my money to the St. Louis Community Foundation and say, I care about puppies in the theater. Please, go do good on my behalf in those realms.
Sure. It's a way for people with money to pool their money and make an investment. And that fund is managed by a company, whether it's a community foundation or an investment firm, either way. And when the donor gives that money, their tax exemption comes at the time of the donation. So if I made money to the Amy Bossy donor advised fund of $10,000, that's when I would get that tax deduction. However, my donor advised fund would, I can say when and how I want to give that money away. So, and there's no regulation. There's no 5% rule like there is with a foundation. So essentially I'm just hoarding my wealth, and whoever is managing that donor advised fund, let's say it's Schwab Charitable, they have no incentive for me to give away that money, right? Because they're managing that fund and they're getting paid to manage it. So what's their incentive for me to give away that $10,000? There is no incentive. So guess what the top 5 nonprofits were last year? And actually, I think for the past 5 years, they were all donor advised fund management companies. So Schwab Charitable, Fidelity Charitable, they didn't do anything with the money. They just sat there with the money. So what are they doing? They're saving it for a rainy day. I'm not saying, pressing judgment or doing anything, but saying we as a nonprofit sector should do more to advocate for putting perhaps a 5% spending cap every year, or like we do with foundations. Because what is that money being saved for when it could be doing good and it's just being hoarded right now. And so those are just things I think that folks don't think about, that maybe don't even know about, because these for-profit, Schwab Charitable, Fidelity, they have all of the resources to go out and be like salespeople and say, put your money in a donor advised fund. And we as nonprofits don't have those resources. And so we're already at a disadvantage. And then there's also, I was on a community foundation webinar where it's like, here, this is how you get connected to donor advised funds. And there was a woman on the call who had a donor advised fund. And she said, you know what? I have a DAF and no one would ever know because it's anonymous. I don't have to tell anyone. And I contribute when and how I want to. And what's more is when that donation is made, so let's say my nonprofit gets a donation from Amy Bossy Donor Advised Fund, that just comes through Schwab Charitable. And if I don't want Schwab to tell them who is making the donation, I can list it as anonymous. So they'll never know unless I say, go ahead, Schwab, tell them I made that donation and tell them they can contact me. Ugh, so many barriers, so much blocking access and so many layers of power. It's just really frustrating and makes more work for the nonprofit when there's already so much work around fundraising and probably the day-to-day work of just fulfilling your mission anyway, right? So obviously we're here talking about community fundraising, community-centric fundraising, pooled giving, and mutual aid. That really popped up during the pandemic. All of the evolving tech platforms. On Tuesday, I was in and out of a day-long conference all on AI and all the possibilities and implications and complications that it can have. And it's growing every day. Donor advised funds, we just talked about that. Trust-based philanthropy and participatory grant making, which is a really important tenet of community-centric fundraising because it involves the people that are receiving the funding and helps them be part of the process and part of the decision-making efforts. Activist donors and gift restrictions. So this has really popped up with the crisis in Israel. People who say, I am not going to donate if you use my money for this, or I will only donate if you stop doing XYZ. And philanthropic capitalism and cryptocurrency. If you don't have a way to accept cryptocurrency or a policy around it, you should get one. It's just something that we deal with now, right? And then household resilience and wealth building, the whole generational transfer of wealth that is in process. Are you paying attention to that? How are you attracting younger folks into your organization? And do you know how they like to be, asked and treated and be part of give them actual agency within your organization? And then volunteerism, which is way down. And we'll talk about that on this slide. So this just came out a couple of weeks ago. It is the Generosity Exchanges report, and it was eye-opening. So volunteerism is way down. And we already talked about how giving is down when adjusted for inflation. So in 2000, 66% of American households donated. And in 2018, 49% of American households donated. So that's a big decline. And the number one piece, the number one what do you want to call it? Sector that people give to is religious charities. It has been forever, and it probably will be for the longest time. It's just the biggest piece of where people give their money. And, oh, Ashley, go ahead.
Hi, thanks, Amy. I just wanted to jump in because I remembered the point that I was going to make earlier, and it fits really well here. Basically, I was going to mention that since a lot of charitable giving does come from people who are also attendees of various churches, that attendance at churches has kind of dropped pretty significantly. And so just as a function of their population, just by the numbers going down in attendance, their donations and their volunteerism is also going to take a hit. And and especially after COVID popped off, we saw the economy contract a lot. And so when people don't have disposable income, if they don't have money to pay their own bills, they're not going to have money to donate either. So I think those are definitely some key factors that have seen a lot of the donation dollars dry up.
Yeah. And I think churches, religious organizations also rely heavily on volunteerism, but even that number has taken a huge hit. So what is all this data? What should we think about from it? However, when you look at the data, while contributions and volunteer hours have increased, the actual number of volunteer donors and volunteers has dropped. So that's why the overall percentage. And the ways that people are giving money and time are changing because of technology and because they don't want to just be frivolous. They want it to have a deeper meaning. They want to have a deeper connection. And we are so exhausted mentally, emotionally, physically from that manufactured urgency, from the pandemic, from every natural disaster that has happened, from just everything. We cannot get one more message that says, I need your help now, or this is going to happen. Catastrophe after catastrophe. So crisis donors, crisis giving is wearing us all out. Younger donors are really looking for something different. They want to be treated with respect and given agency within the organization. And the shrinking middle class is really, and the fact that folks are putting their money into donor advised funds is showing us that there's a shrinking number of, or is showing that there's an increase in the reliance on a small group of donors because they're the ones that are actually giving the most money. So what we do know is that philanthropy always sounds like someone else. People always, as a consultant, they're like, how do I get more people of color to contribute, to volunteer, to join our boards and our committees? And that is a very convoluted answer. They think that the answer is like, well, there's no one out there that wants to do that with me or my organization. When the truth is, there's an organization called the Donors of Color Network, and there are at least 1.3 million high net worth BIPOC households in the United States. They are there. You're just not looking in the right places. And they're not being paid attention to. They're younger, so that generational wealth has not passed down because it just did not exist because of the racist practices that have happened. So now they're showing up and they're giving more frequently, and they are actually giving more of their wealth than any other racial and ethnic donor group. And it shows up in more non-traditional ways. So that other slide where we talked about cryptocurrency and other things. They don't want to be considered the monolith. So you can't look to one person and have one BIPOC person and have them be the answer for everything. And understand that transformative wealth goes beyond just dollars. We need to look at how to involve them in true partnership, really connecting, not just tapping on the shoulder and expecting it to happen. True connection with them, their peers, etc. And how it benefits the community as a whole. And if you are just trying to take this as a one-off, it's going to show it has to be representative throughout your entire organization. So start from within, what do they say? Look in the mirror. What does your staff look like? What does your board look like? And start there. Another great study, Bank of America. Women are driving positive change through economic influence and strategic philanthropy. 85% of affluent household and charitable giving decisions were made by women. And also, women also spent more time volunteering. So when we think about who we're asking and how we're asking, we really need to consider that, sometimes when we ask, we think, oh, do you have to check with your husband? Do you have to this? Those are outdated thoughts. We talked about donor advised funds. And also the younger generations. While they might not have an overall giving strategy, they're twice as likely to actually donate and incorporate a giving strategy into their wealth management plans. So they do have them. They just need to be asked. The number one reason that people give used to be because they were asked. That was a question on my test when I was in grad school. Now it has been updated. The data shows that it is because of personal values or beliefs. And then interest in the issue. That's huge. How do you know what people's personal values and beliefs are? Well, we're going to get to that. And you're going to get a copy of this presentation if you want it. So when I first started in grad school, this is what I learned. I learned that donor-centered fundraising was what we learned and how we approached the method, that donors essentially were the center of everything. They remain loyal, they're more generous if you put them at the center of everything. But we know that if that worked, then all organizations, all nonprofits would be flush with cash and they wouldn't need any help fundraising. They would have all the resources they needed to be successful, right? So something must not be working. Enter community-centric fundraising. Instead of being a model or a method, it's a movement, and it's grounded in equity and social justice, and it prioritizes the entire community over individual organizations. Does anyone know who this gentleman is with the unicorn?
That is Boulay.
Boulay, yes.
Yeah, we've got his book at the library.
Nice. He is so interesting, and this is what I knew in my head and my heart to be true before it had a name. I met with this person here, Rachel D'Souza, and she had Gladiator Consulting, which is the consulting firm I work with. We sat together and we just thought, how do we do this work, but do it better, make actual change happen? And she said, I had been reading these things by this guy, Boulay, and it's called Nonprofit AF. You can decide what the AF stands for. He has an amazing blog, an amazing book. Thank you, Lisa. And he is the one that came up with this term, community-centric fundraising. And now Rachel is on the Global Council. And the thing about a movement is that everyone can play a part and everyone has a part to play. So it's not hierarchical. It's not this is the only way, right? It's engaging and it's constantly learning. So what is it? Begins with values. We talked about that as the number one reason that people give. So we know that fundraising has been grounded in values of donor appeasement and nonprofit survival. That's the way it's operated from the beginning. Remember, when we first started, we talked about the system is designed this way. But enter CCF, and the movement seeks to ground fundraising in values of equity and social justice. We want to make entire change and start solving some of those problems, right? Work ourselves out of a job. I think Vu said it great one time in one of the blogs I read. He had a blueberry bush in his backyard, and he'd cut it down, and every year it would grow back. And he finally realized he had to dig down to the roots and scoop out the roots. And that's what we're doing. We keep fishing folks out of the river and never taking the time to walk up and see why they're falling in the first place, right? So there are some key principles of community-centric fundraising. The first one is great. It's that the work that we do must be grounded in race, equity, and social justice. There are many ways to do that. There's lots of tools and resources out there. What Lisa is popping up in the chat is fantastic. Yes, he is hilarious. He is lately doing some ASMR to help you be calm and collected, because this work is hard. This is social change work, so it's not just get up, show up every day. It takes a toll on us emotionally, mentally, and physically. So some of the stuff that he does is pretty funny. I encourage y'all to check it out. There's a great Slack channel for CCF. There's just lots of resources, and I could pass them on at the end of the presentation. And then I love number 2. We've talked about this a lot. Your individual organization mission is not an island. It's not important. It's part of a collective community. It's part of an ecosystem as a whole. And we are not in competition with each other. We are generous and mutually supportive of one another. What does that mean? How does that look? It can be when I send my thank you note to my donors. It says, "Thank you so much for supporting organization XYZ." There are other organizations doing similar work. Here they are. Check them out. That's just one example. And this one is very crucial. Time is valued as equally as money. Time is the only non-renewable resource. When we do things to our board members who are volunteers, like saying you must have raise $1,000 or $10,000 to be on this board, and we don't pay attention to the things that we're requiring of their time, we're doing them a disservice. One, because not everyone has access to that capital, and 2, if I'm already giving you all of this time, maybe I don't have all of that treasure, and you're already discounting me as a board member based off of that threshold of dollars, right? We treat donors as partners, and that means we are transparent, assume the best intentions, but also have those difficult conversations. Not all money is good money. If we enter into a dialogue with someone and determine that we don't share the same values, that's okay. They're not for you. And be able to say that, I mean, always being professional and personable, but be okay with knowing that we're not going to chase the dollars. We foster a sense of belonging, not othering. This is absolutely critical when you're evaluating your entire fundraising program and your entire organization, when you start to think about why you are or are not attracting a certain type of donor or volunteer, what does your organization look like internally? Again, it's taking that mirror and looking. And it's not just about saying, oh, well, our board is diverse, our staff is diverse, or we're trying to recruit diverse people. You're not going to keep them and be successful unless you have things in place to create that sense of belonging. Unless if you hire someone, a BIPOC person, but you don't have the methods and tools in place and resources to help them succeed and be successful, then they're not going to be successful. Same with board members. If you have an all-white board and you have one BIPOC person, they're probably not going to feel like they belong. And we promote the understanding that everyone, donors, staff, board members, personally benefit from engaging in the work of social justice. It's not just charity and compassion. Has anyone heard of white saviorism or charity washing? Yes. You want to say something about it?
I think
I've experienced the term in which someone of the opposite color or race rather has this need to feel like they want to just participate when another person of color is in need. I think what brings to mind is the movie which Sandra Bullock played in, and the young guy, I can't think of his name, he's a football player, and they wanted to be the savior, but I think in the end, I think we found out that there was some nefarious activity going on with his funds, and they raised him, I guess, from early age, and adopted him, but it wasn't, I think, a good outcome as gotten older.
Absolutely.
They were praised for doing that.
I think about the groups that go on mission trips to other parts of the world or country, and you hear from these organizations that they helped in the orphanage, and they leave. The next group comes in and they repainted that orphanage. Ashley, you had something to say.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. I just wanted to comment on the white saviorism as well. I think that it's really easy for people who live with financial security and food security and all of these resources. They make the assumption that they should receive gratitude when they do something nice. And then anything outside of that is very unwelcome to them. So they get very upset if somebody is not just like gushing with gratitude, but then they forget that these people they're interacting with or they're trying to help or whatever, they're living with real world problems. If they're dealing with food insecurity, their body is probably in a state of emergency. Like they're just not, like they're living in the trenches, right? And so it's not going to strike them to be like, oh my gosh, thank you so much, you're the best person ever, and like stroke their ego. So I think that it's really dangerous when people go into volunteering or go into fundraising with the assumption that they should be receiving a lot of gratitude, or they should be getting a very specific response from people in the community.
Absolutely. You're 1,000% on track. I think when you see those pictures of people in other countries holding hands or holding a child of color, and for show, not compassion. Well said, Lisa. And so it's just like they do it for the gram, they do it for the photo op, and they're not making any true change. In fact, they're probably causing more harm. What do they call it? Oh, social tourism or something like that. Or people that just decide we're going to go build a well, dig a well in this community. Does the community actually want that? What does the community want and need? Are you just coming in and digging up some dirt? Will this be sustainable over time? You know, you hear those horror stories of they did this, but it's not useful to us now. So yes, to all of those things. So what is community-centric fundraising? How do we do it? It's not anti-donor, even though a lot of people think that it is. It does not look to shame the donor or it actually has a lot more in common with donor-centric fundraising than people think. It's not new, even though it kind of feels that way. It's nothing new. This has been around since the idea of mutual aid from the indigenous cultures that existed here before this country was colonized. It is not something you can do by yourself. This is definitely it's in the name, community. It is not linear. It's never going to be finished. It is constantly evolving. And it's not going to be the one-stop shop. And also, it's not impossible. Just the fact that you're here today means that you have the faith, have the belief that it can be done. So how do we do it? So first, when we start to identify folks that can be involved in this work, that's what we call identification in fundraising. We need to start to consider these things in the work. Who does this partnership or relationship actually benefit? Just me? The community at large? The people we're actually seeking to help? Does this partnership or relationship differently impact racial and ethnic groups? And take the time to sit down and think these through. There's a worksheet on the CCF website called CCF Aligned Actions that can help you through this. What actions can you take to minimize or eliminate racial disparities? And this can exist. You can drill down. You can start organization-wide and drill all the way down to your development department specifically, your fundraising. And how does our organization work to delegitimize and deconstruct structures of white power and privilege? Has anyone looked at the characteristics of white supremacy? I'll include that in the resources. It's a really great article. And I'm going to get their name wrong. And again, this is just how the system was designed, how the system was set up. So this is how we've been operating forever. And we have to unlearn some things before we can do better, right? And I will put it in the chat. It's a really great article. And then sort of a listing. So it's things like either or thinking, individualism, power hoarding. It's just a good tool to use and start thinking through this work. Putting it in the chat now. And then, do our donors reflect the community we seek to serve? And then beyond that, our board and our staff. And if not, well, obviously, how can you seek to change that? How can you get them involved? How do we use data and what stories do we tell? Data can be used to manipulate. We know that it has bias. And then what stories do we tell with that data? Also, when you build your cultural competencies, think using some of those tools like the white supremacist characteristics and other, Ford through Ferguson does a really great worksheet, Creative Reaction Lab for systems change thinking. think about the existing structures that you have and how you can change them. And then think beyond just, tomorrow, next week. Think about long term, and also recognize that change doesn't happen quickly. It happens over time. Think about who already gives to your organization, or if you're brand new, who you plan to ask or who you plan to get involved with your organization. Where are your donors geographically? And then what technology do you need? There's a really great website because we always have to think about compliance. The government is always involved. Big Brother is always watching. It's called Give Butter, literally give butter. It, I think, was a play on giving better, and it, morphed into Give Butter. I'll put it in the chat. And it is a free giving platform, but also a CRM. So it helps you manage your donors. You can move up to a paid service, but you really don't need to if you're brand new to fundraising. It's a great place to start. And it helps you be compliant in accepting donations because it'll send the tax receipts and help you get organized around the stewardship. I love this. Pick your first failure and do it fast. We are so entrenched in our white supremacist culture values of being afraid to fail. And one thing I love about working at Gladiator Consulting and kind of in the unlearning as I go through my own anti-racist journey is that you are going to fail. No one's perfect. Everyone fails. But it's what you do after that that matters. So how do you learn from your failure and what do you do next? And if you are within a group of people, maybe talking that through, discussing the learnings, and then making a plan for next time. So you've got the identification pieces mapped out. Now you have to actually talk to the people, to the donors, potential funders. People always say it's about the relationship, and it is. Well, when we think about relationships with people that are in our lives, we have to actually do work to maintain those relationships. So schedule the non-ask meeting with folks. Take the time to build those relationships. And no one is going to just, I ask this when I do specific trainings on how to make the ask. Has anyone ever given you money right away, like without you asking? And I've never, actually, I did have one person say yes, and I think they just gave them $20. So like, oh, you work for a nonprofit, here's some money. And that's interesting, cool. But it usually doesn't happen that way, especially for larger gifts. You have to build the relationship. And how do you do that? You get to know them. You say, hey, do you want to meet up for coffee, lunch, a walk in the park, a Zoom if they're somewhere else in the country? But then it's about the questions that you ask. And this is a really good question. If you could bring about a change in the world as you define it, what would that be? And how does your philanthropy, help you get there? And the hardest thing is listening to understand. So that means you're not talking. There's a really great book by Jerry Panis. He is, one of the fathers of modern fundraising. And he said that in a donor meeting, you should be listening 70% of the time and speaking 30% of the time. So always asking those open-ended questions and then just taking in the information. Sometimes that's really hard to do because we just think we should tell them everything, give them as much information as possible about all the work that we are doing with the organization and about, the person, the success story from such and such. But how do you get to know someone best? you ask those open-ended questions. So then continuing that cultivation with that potential donor, it's an ongoing process. When I was first learning fundraising in the donor-centric method, it was whatever the donor wanted, the donor got, right? And that made me really uncomfortable. It put me in a lot of uncomfortable situations. It always made me feel othered. It was hard to develop real relationships and made me feel icky. It really just gave me the ick, as the kids say. I did not like, that made me not like fundraising. And that to me just smacked of a used car salesman, right? Being a yes man or a yes woman. We certainly didn't talk about hard subjects, but the work that we're doing and that we're attempting to do as nonprofits is life-changing, right? It's world-changing, it's systems-changing. So we have to talk about those hard subjects. We're not here to chase the money, to chase the dollars. So if we avoid those conversations, we're not doing anyone any favors. The work that we do is political. It just is. Everything is nowadays. And it's also charitable. So we have to have those conversations. And we can do them civilly. There's lots of resources out there for how to approach those conversations. And of course, practice. So when you don't have those conversations and when you don't engage your donors and potential donors in those conversations, you're doing yourself and the organization and the donor, potential donor, a disservice. And you're not treating them with respect. You're not assuming that they can have those adult, grown-up, professional conversations. And what those conversations lead to are learning, connection, and growth, and true understanding, and opening up ways for that person to become involved in ways that you might not even know, and that your organization offers, and how real change can happen beyond just surface level of, oh, I know that you have a grandchild that really likes the theater. So maybe that means you like giving to our youth theater program. You know, we're talking transformational, not transactional relationships here. And the only way to build those is to truly have some deep conversations. How does that feel? I'm assuming everyone's okay with it.
Amy?
Yes.
Sorry, I just want to make one comment. I like what you said about making it transformational versus transactional. Unfortunately, I think a lot of, I know over the years, nonprofit organizations had to hold a big gala at the end of the year or sometime during the year, which really took a lot of effort, investment in time and resources and funding. And I think people are looking for other ways to connect so that it doesn't feel so transactional, that you're not always asking for a handout or a gift. But if you don't have this big event that brings people together, I think or many organizations find a task to have that more transformational, more personal discussions, because we're just not in the same room anymore.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We're going to get to that, because event fundraising, when I say the word fundraising to people, I think a lot of time they think that that's what I do, is I plan pretty parties. And if you don't make the event authentic and do the follow-up work after the event, then that is all that you've done, is plan a pretty party. And you spent a lot of money to do just that, to probably have some rubber chicken, right? Because the meal's not usually that great. To raise maybe some money that night. But when you look at the true ROI, the true cost per dollar raised, it probably wasn't that great of an ROI. So we'll cover that in a second. Oh, Lisa, yes.
Yeah, so two things. One, because time flies when we're having fun. It is 12:48, but good news, in the program, we're actually scheduled to go till 1.
Oh,
so
okay.
you have time, but I just wanted to give you that kind of time alert.
Oh, was that it? Okay, cool. So I think a lot of times folks are really afraid to talk to their donors, and how can you have a relationship with someone if you don't actually speak to them? So a lot of times as a consultant, they ask me a question and I'm like, well, that's a great question, but have you actually asked your donor? Oh no, how do I do that? Well, pick up the phone, or actually even better, ask that donor how they like to be asked. Do you like texts, emails, direct messages on Insta, however. And then it might not be you to actually do the outreach to them. It might be someone else. And then talking about the galas, we love to tell the story of the organization, and we should, as long as we're doing it ethically. Do not create for the community that you serve. Create with them. If you're telling their story, have them be part of how, why, where, all of it, how they're telling their story. No more of that, they call it poverty porn, where if you make them cry, they'll give the money. That's not true. We're coming from a place of strength, a place of empowerment, and engaging the community in the story that we want to tell and how they want to tell the story. So do no harm is no longer enough. We need to do active good. And by the way, each of these slides could be its own workshop and presentation. So then we need to talk about thanking them. This is where after the event is over, after the gala is over, after they've given a donation, how we thank them is going to lead to that relationship blossoming and grow into another gift. So how do they like to be thanked? Ask them, trial and error, see what works. But don't just assume that they need that written letter sent 2 weeks after the event. Test some things out, see what works, have conversations with them. That was a lot to process. I understand that. And there is no, again, this is community-centric fundraising. There's no one right way. The point is to try, fail, collaborate, and see what works. Anyone have any other ideas, thoughts, questions?
Thank you for your time and giving of this information. Philanthropy is an area that I don't tap into regularly, but it's more so around fund development and nonprofit work. So this is good to hear some of the sound bites and information you shared in your deck.
You are so welcome.
Same. Thank you for even hosting this. I just found out about all of the small business nonprofit events that are happening with St. Louis Library. So this is really cool to just even be a part of and listen to this thing. So thank you.
You're so welcome. This has been so, oh yes, Adrienne Marie Brown is a brilliant, brilliant human. Love anything they write.
Yeah, and the link that Erica dropped in, the forms, blah, 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 that is a survey. So you can, if you did think this was awesome, which it was, you can share that. If you have comments on this program or the whole conference or anything, we'd love feedback, because this is, as I said, our second annual. So hopefully there will be a third annual and it will just keep getting better. But as Amy said, it will be better if we hear from our community and y'all are part of the conversation, because, you know, us librarians sitting here in Andrew Carnegie's fancy building just deciding what the people need isn't going to cut it. So we appreciate you people telling us what you want.
Yes, and I'm going to send this presentation and any other resources to Lisa, and she will share it with all of the attendees. And again, we learn by taking in the knowledge. So please be, you don't have to be nice, but please be constructive in your feedback. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, be nice. Be kind. Let's all be kind.
To be clear is to be kind. I will say that.
Yes, true.
Yes.
And having the hard conversations and the deep conversations is important.
Absolutely.
But hard. So thank you so much, Amy. That was amazing. I really learned a lot. I appreciate everyone giving us part of your Friday and being part of this, and then doing what you're doing out in the world. So that's all great. We did record this program, so assuming technology cooperates, we should eventually get that up on the St. Louis Public Library YouTube channel, along with so much information at the libraries. Come visit us. Again, thank you, Amy. Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate us. Give us your feedback, and maybe one of y'all will be the winner of the raffle. So fingers crossed. I did that in a presentation earlier this week. They thought I was flipping them off. These are crossed fingers. Just FYI.
Oh boy. That's hilarious.
So, on that note, everybody have a wonderful weekend, okay? And thank you so much.